Hello everyone and welcome to another Daily Dose of Drupal. Today we're on episode number 212. I am Shane Thomas. You can follow me on Twitter at smthomas3. And today we're going to be talking about 5 different ways you can install Drupal 8 modules. Yes, that's right, 5 different ways. So we're going to go ahead and get started. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to open up the Drupal.org project page for Admin Toolbar. We're going to be looking at 2 different modules today, Admin Toolbar and Module Filter. They're both pretty simple modules, so they're easy to kind of demonstrate just the module install and uninstall process. So it's important to realize that not all Drupal modules are created equal. You can, of course, use Drupal modules, contributed modules, from the Drupal.org website to extend the functionality of your Drupal site. But it's important to look at the Drupal.org project page when you're installing a module you haven't used before. There are some important things you want to keep in mind, such as when the last commits were. So you can see this one had a commit just a month ago. So you know it's being actively committed to, it's being actively developed or at least supported. It's also important to look at how many sites are using this module. Again, this could factor in Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 installs, so keep that in mind. You can actually click on that and see how the breakdown is. You also can see the releases. There's a development version here, and this just kind of tells you some basic information about the module. There's also documentation. So if you're new to Drupal, the Drupal.org modules section is where you're going to want to go to find out all this information. And the first thing we're going to look at is how to download a module manually. So I'm just going to go ahead and I'll just grab the zip here. You could grab the tar.gz or the zip, either way. And this is going to go ahead and throw this in my downloads folder. So I'm just going to grab this and I'm going to drop it into my local development site. So I just have a local development site here. I have it links to Pantheon, so I have it under Pantheon. And here is my Drupal 8 site. So you can see I'm looking for this modules directory. I'm going to paste it in here, and I'm going to extract it. Now the important thing is you see how it's actually in a subfolder. I don't want that, so I'm actually going to grab it from in here and just drop it in there and get rid of that folder. So you can see I have in my modules directory, I have admin toolbar. If I now go to my Drupal 8 website, again, that was the file system for my Drupal 8 site, and I go to the extend page, you will see that the admin toolbar should now be here. I can go ahead and install that. And give it a second here. And now you see I have drop-down menus in my admin toolbar up here, or in my toolbar. So that's all that module does. I mean, there's also some other sub-modules that come with it that make it even more helpful, but it's a pretty basic module and it's useful for site administration. If you are familiar with Drupal 7 and you're moving to Drupal 8, the one important thing is that unlike Drupal 7, when you uninstall a module, I'll actually go to the uninstall page, there's no disabled status. When you uninstall it, it's uninstalled. So I'm going to go ahead and uninstall the admin toolbar here. And you'll notice that it says it'll be uninstalled and all the data will be lost. See how I have the drop down? Once this uninstalls, I will no longer have my drop down menu. And you can see it's gone. So that is method number 1. Let's go ahead and look at method number 2, which would be to use the update manager module, which if we look, and you'll want to double check that you have the Drupal 8 update manager module installed, which I do. And I'm also going to go back, and now that I have completely uninstalled the module, I can go ahead and delete it from here. So I no longer have that module there. Now I'm going to come back to my Drupal website. I'm going to click this Install New Module button. So this is method 2 using Update Manager. And I'm just going to copy this link here. So I'm going to right click, copy the link address, and drop it in. I could also, since I have it downloaded locally, I could upload it here. One of the nice things about using this method is it's going to put it in the right spot. So fortunately it thinks that I still have it installed. Let's go ahead and clear the cache quick, and we'll try again. It does take a few seconds to clear the cache. It's important. Things in Drupal are cached. If something you think is not working and it should be, a good idea when you're developing Drupal websites is just clear the cache. Just double check that. You'd be surprised how many times it actually seems to fix things. So here I'm installing the admin toolbar, and you'll notice if I go back to this directory, admin toolbar is now back in there because this update manager actually went out, pulled it from the Drupal.org website, and dropped it into the right place and set it up in the correct spot in my file system. Now if I go back down here, I could of course install it. I'm not going to do that since you already know how that works, but that's how to use the update manager to download a module. You can still install it the same way through the interface. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to learn how to use Drush. So this is method number 3, using Drush. And I'm using something called Lando for my local development, so I'm going to have to prefix my commands with the word Lando, and all that does is it uses my specific Lando instance inside the Docker container for my website. So if you are not familiar with what Lando is, you can go back to my last episode. I cover some basics on how to get it set up, what it is, how it works, and all that. So I would recommend that. Now, if I want to download a module, I can use Drush. Here's the Drush website. It's essentially a command line shell for Drupal. I'm going to go to the docs to show you all the different things it can do. Go to Drush commands, and you can see on the left there are a ton of things that you can do with Drush. I'm not going to go through all of those. The one I'm going to focus on is the one that says PM. And I'm going to look, and you can see there's a PM download, PM enable, PM uninstall. If I go to PM download, it's downloading projects from Drupal.org or other sources. I can type the command drush pm-download, or as a shortcut, an alias is drushdl. So I simply start with Lando, because that's my instance. If you are using just a different local development environment, you'll probably just need the word drush, download, and then the name of the module. So drush download module filter. You can ignore this PHP error. This happens to do with PHP 7.2. So we don't need to worry about that. You'll also need to make sure if you're downloading with Drush, you are inside your web directory or your web root for Drupal. If you look, you can see my index.php files here. The modules are here. If I was in any subfolder of this, it would work, but I need to make sure I'm in this web root in order for that to work. If I go back, you can see I now have the module filter module. I'm going to also use Drush to enable it. So I'm going to type Lando again because I need to do that. Drush en module filter. It's going to ask me if I want to enable it. Again, ignore that PHP error. And it says module filter was enabled successfully. So if I head back to my Drupal 8 website, I go back or just refresh this page, you're going to see a difference right away. Now I have module filter installed. Module filter is a nice way to easily sort through and organize your modules page. It's just a simple change to your site that makes enabling, disabling, finding modules much easier. As you can see, I can do a very instant sort. Everything's categorized here, so it's easier to see the different modules, and it works very nicely. So I'm going to also do an uninstall using Drush. So if I go back to the Drush page and I look for the PM section and look for PM uninstall, you can see it's drush pm-uninstall, or as an alias, drush pmu. I'll go ahead and type out the full one so you can see that both work. going to ask me if I want to uninstall module filter. I will go ahead and select yes. And once it's uninstalled, my module page will go back to normal. It's important to realize that uninstalling with Drush does not delete it. It just simply uninstalls it. So if I look here, both of these modules are still here. I'm actually going to just go ahead and delete both of these right now. Remember, you don't want to delete modules from your modules page or from your modules directory until you have uninstalled them completely. So since I had uninstalled module filter, I can go ahead and remove it. So that was method 3. We went through let's recap. You can manually download the module and move it to your file system manually and extract it, of course. You can use the update manager built within Drupal 8. You can use Drush, which is a command line scripting tool. And then we're going to go through the 4th one, which is using Tuple Consul. Now, Tuple Consul is a command line tool that allows you to generate boilerplate code, interact with and debug Drupal, and do simple things like download modules. It's incredibly powerful. It's especially powerful if you're building out modules and you need helpful code generated for you, so you don't have to type all the code in. It'll kind of give you a boilerplate or a template to start with. But it's also simple enough that you can just use it to download and install modules, very similar to Drush. So there is definitely some overlap, but it's still helpful to have both, in my opinion, because they don't do all the same things. Sometimes it's easier to use one than the other. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to look at just the documentation here. So I just clicked through, selected the English documentation, and you can see if I scroll down a little bit, available commands, there are a ton of commands in here. So you can interact with the database, you can debug different things on your website, you can integrate with features, you can generate, this is the really powerful stuff, generate forms, generate things for your module, generate a theme. But we're going to keep going until we find module. You can see I can module download, module install, and module uninstall. If I go to module download, it's going to say Drupal module : download, and then any arguments. Drush has some of these same things that they're labeled differently, but it has a lot of the same arguments as well. So let's go ahead, clear this, and let's download admin toolbar using Tuple Consul. Again, I'm going to prefix my command with Lando because I want it to interact with my Lando environment. You will not necessarily need to do that. And it's just the word Drupal, module download, and then the name of the module. And if you don't know the name of the module, and this is actually a good point that I missed, it's the name right here at the very end of the URL on Drupal.org. So if you go to, for instance, module filter, you can see that I would need module_filter to get this module. So that's the project name, and that's how you can easily go about downloading it on your site. So Lando Drupal module : download admin toolbar. And this is going to go ahead and ask me a couple questions. So enter the contrib project path. So a lot of times, especially on bigger websites, you might not necessarily want your modules just in the module directory. You may want a contrib folder, a custom folder for any custom modules that were built, and then perhaps maybe a features folder. So if you use the features module to create any features, you could have a features folder there as well. I'm just going to leave it at the default. And it says it's not available, so we're going to run the download process to get the modules. So it's going to say select your release. I'm going to go ahead and just select 0, the first one, and it's going to go ahead and download that for me. So it gives me an opportunity to select which version I want, and then it will go ahead and drop it in. Now if I look, you can see it automatically by default will put a contrib folder and drop the admin toolbar module in there. If I go back to my modules page and refresh, you'll see that admin toolbar will now show up. I'm going to go ahead and enable it. So if we head back to the Drupal Consul page, we go down to module install, you can see it's module : install. And uninstall is the same way, module : uninstall. So I'm going to go ahead and type lando Drupal module : install admin toolbar. And there are some things that are nice about Drush and some things that are nice about Drupal Consul. So in my opinion, one of the things I like about Drupal Consul is it's interactive. It'll ask you questions, so you don't necessarily have to know everything when you're building the command. One of the things I like about Drush is if you download a module with Drush and it contains submodules, it'll actually give you the project name for those submodules. Because if you notice, there's actually 3 modules, or 2 of these are submodules to the admin toolbar. And for instance, you might not know what the name is here, but you can see it's admin toolbar tools, so I could also install that one. So admin toolbar tools, whereas Drush would have actually did that for me, or at least told me on the command line that that was available. Again, you can always come to the module page and you can see the machine name that you would need to type in, but you can see this is going to go ahead and it's installing the module. It's rebuilding the cache, so it's going to take a second here. But once it does, you'll notice that when I refresh, my admin toolbar is going to change up here. So because I added in the admin toolbar, I will get the drop-down functionality, as you can see. Also, I added those extra tools. That adds right here. So you can see I can flush the cache, for instance, right from this drop-down menu. Now, that was method 4. Last but not least, we're going to talk about Composer and how you can use Composer to manage your project's dependencies. This, in my opinion, is the best way, but it's also the most complicated because you have to understand how Composer works. You have to understand why you might need it on your project, but it is the most powerful because it allows you to manage the dependencies or what your project needs to run all from within Composer. So Composer is a PHP dependency manager. And if you notice, if I go back to my doc root of my site, I have a composer.json file here. And depending on how your site is structured, it might be a level above your web root, it might be within your web root, but you have to make sure you have Composer installed. This isn't necessarily, depending on your development environment, it just might not be there. If you do have Composer installed, and you have this Composer JSON file, you can look it up. Again, I'm using Lando, and I'm using it with my Pantheon environment, so depending on how your environment's set up, it could be a little bit different. But inside here, there's a require statement. So Composer installers, it requires Drupal Consul, and it might have some other things in here. But what I want to do is I want to use Composer to install, or at least download that module filter module. So again, I have to prefix it with Lando. You may not, depending on your environment. Lando Composer require, and then it starts with Drupal / the module name. So in this case, module filter. So it said it finished it. It was successful. And this is going to go through this entire process of looking through that package.json file. Composer.json file, and you can see it says composer.json has been updated. And then it's going to update all the dependencies within the project, looking at that composer.json file. And once it's done, we're going to take a look. So let's go ahead and look at composer.json again, and you can see Drupal / module filter has been added. It also contains the version number. So I'm not going to get into what all the special characters means, but you should definitely do some research on Composer if you're interested. There's a lot of power in it and a lot of things it can do to help manage your project dependencies. But now if I go back to my Drupal website, come back to the extend page, you can see that down here somewhere, there it is, module filter. Again, Composer doesn't install it for you. Composer just will allow you to download it and manage it as a dependency to your project. So you'll still have to use one of the other tools, either through the UI or through Drush or through Drupal Consul to actually install the module. So that's it for today on the Daily Dose of Drupal. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a little bit about 5 different ways you can download and install Drupal modules. Again, it really depends on what your preferences are. Ultimately, when the module is installed, it's going to work the same way. It's just how do you want your project to be set up. If you want to control everything, and you're really big into using version control, I would recommend looking into Composer. I think that's the most powerful way to manage your dependencies, and then using Drush or Drupal Consul to actually do the installing and uninstalling of your modules. You can, of course, use the UI. I mean, I still do, and that's important as well. But if you are just getting started with Drupal, the easiest way to get started is probably just using the Update Manager. It's simple. It takes care of a lot of the basics for you. So depending on where you're at and the type and scale of the websites you're creating will probably affect how you want to install modules using Drupal. So I hope you learned a little bit of something. If you're new to Drupal, hopefully it was helpful. If you've seen Drupal and been around Drupal before, hopefully it's a good recap of all the different available ways to install modules. I know it can be a lot, and it can seem, maybe you wonder why there are so many options for installing modules. But again, it's to provide flexibility so it can fit whether you're building a small site that you're just hosting on your own, or whether you're building a big enterprise level site and you want to have a complete development workflow that can kind of scale depending on those needs, and that's why there are so many different options. So thanks again for watching the Daily Dose of Drupal. We'll see you next time.